All right, guys. Well, we got a problem here. Big problems with this plane. No, what happened with this plane, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to the next project. What happened with this plane was the owner had a bit of an oops landing with it. Fortunately, the plane did really well, but what it ultimately allows us to do is to make some changes to the aircraft to make it more suitable for the owner. So two of the big changes are, number one, the new engine. Number two, we're putting a set of Electron gear in this engine, or this aircraft. And this is an Excalibur XL, so it's a big plane. What I've done to this aircraft so far is basically stripped it. Okay, now I'll show you kind of the details of everything that's going on here. Basically, we are doing a bunch of things to this plane. We're going to be cleaning it up. We're going to be installing the engine, installing the Electron gear, but I'll show you a couple things here that I found as I go through it. So the first thing was the front former here was separated. So I think that had to do with the stress that happened on the airframe right in this area. You can see this piece is loose. Okay, there's a crack there, so we'll fix that up. There's one on this side, right there. All in all, though, it held up really well. I'm quite impressed. So the other side of this former is also loose. Now, I had to strip all this stuff out because in order to take the airline system out, I needed the tank out, right? So that's why the tank's out. We pulled all the air system stuff out. There's some of the air system components there, just all the tubing and crap. So we haven't taken the gear out yet. That'll happen. What else? Oh yeah, the servo for the flap, which is right there, that the servo horn's severely bent. That'll need to be fixed. We're going to check that servo and make sure it's still good. We'll need to do up a new linkage there as well too, but that's a bit of the damage as well. But all in all, the plane held up very well. One of the equipment trays here, the original builder basically took the faux carbon and installed it over top of the wood tray. Now this wasn't glued very well. I think it was done with like 5-minute epoxy or something. You can see a bit of the overage there. So what I've gone and done is I've separated these two. Well, they just came apart, and we just put spray glue on there. It's already dry to the touch, so we can stick those two things together. So this is the spray glue that I used on this particular stuff. I also used 3M 77 adhesive as well too. Both work really well, but that's what we're using in this case. So what you want to do when you use spray glue is you want to you spray it on, and it's a lot like contact cement. You let it dry so it's not goopy anymore, and then all you have to do is just stick the pieces together. Now you only kind of get one chance at this for it to go really well. But fortunately, it was fairly easy because you just have to line up the screw holes from previous. Now the nice thing about the spray glue is once you put it together, it is extremely solid. Like, that's stuck already and works really well. So that's ready to go. These are the old ones, and still perfectly fine, in good shape. This is where most of the stuff for the turbine was installed. So we'll just keep everything there. Fuel pump goes there, things like that. So I just want to show you quickly the technology difference between old and new technology. So here is the two turbines put together. Now, of course, both these turbines have the exact same amount of thrust. The weight is a little bit different. The King Tech is just a little bit lighter by about 120 grams. But you got to remember too that the solenoids are also in this turbine. They're not in this turbine. The solenoids for the JetCat are sitting right here. So that's the size difference, physical size difference on the engines. Very, very cool. And the other thing that's really impressive is just the stuff that needs to go in the plane. So this is all the stuff for the JetCat engine. This is all the stuff for the KingTech engine. That's it. That's the entire turbine, guys. And also the front mount for the UAT. So this just tucks in down here. There. So that was also loose as well. So we'll reglue those pieces. And I've mixed up some 5-minute Hysol, which is this stuff, the 00NS. 5-minute work life, and works really well for gluing stuff quite quickly. And in about 30 minutes, it's solid enough to kind of bump into it and not have any issues. So I'm going to get those things glued, and that's the next step in the repair. We do have everything obviously stripped out. Part of that's for the engine install, which is in a separate video, but everything's been stripped out, and that allows us to get a good look at everything that's going on. All right, guys, so the landing gear that comes for the Excalibur XL is the ER40s, and of course with the specific struts for them. Now these struts are straight when they first come out of the package, so you have to use the angle adjust screw, and that gets us to approximately the correct angle for these struts. So there's quite a bit of preload on that spring, and then the amount of movement we've got left is, you can see the angle right there that it would butt up against right there. So anyways, that's where we're kind of looking to be. Now it does come with these carbon plates. 4 of the carbon plates have a rounded edge on each side, so that's probably for the mains. And then this one has a round and then a sharp edge, so I'm assuming that's for the fronts. Now these things fit onto the gear like that, and then they fit nicely in the slots of the Excalibur. So when they're installed, it looks something like that. The only place that there's plywood is across the top here. So kind of my first thinking with this, my initial impression of what to do would be to bolt these to the gear, Dremel out the head spacing right here, have the bolt come up with the nut on the end, and then screw down the gear with 6 screws into the plywood former. That's probably what I'm going to end up doing. Just need to make sure I've got the proper hardware and everything for all this, but I think that's what's going to happen, and that should be a nice strong way of mounting things. Once we get this mounted, we've got the gear operational cable, and then we're going to have the brake cable as well too to deal with, so we'll kind of sort that stuff out afterwards, but that's what my initial plan is. All right, guys, so here's what we're looking at. I've got the carbon plates installed on both of the main gear. We're going to have to sand these areas or grind them out with the Dremel so the bolt heads can fit in there. So that's the way we're going to go with the main gear. Now on the front, we are too long with everything. So basically we got 2 options here. There's no ways around this. We either have to grind out the front here, which I don't want to do, or we grind out some of this area here, and it's got to be enough for the control arm for the steering to actually work. So basically we're probably going to have to grind out about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of this area just to make everything work. So that's the next thing we're going to do. Haven't installed the carbon plates on here yet, but we will get to that. All right, guys, we've opened up enough here so the front gear will fit in. Basically, we just had to eliminate this former, the lower portion. We've still got our vertical former right there, and I have painted this all blue just to touch it up and make it look pretty. But now the gear does fit in the front opening. All right, and there's what it looks like with the gear roughly in place, guys. So kind of sucks that we have to open up the airframe, but obviously there's only so much you can do and still have the steering mechanism that Electron uses. They did provide these really nice carbon plates that are designed perfectly for this this airframe. So anyways, that's ready to go. We should be able to bolt that in place without any issue and get the wires running, the steering hooked up and stuff. All right, guys, the gear has been rough installed right now. That's one of the nice things about the Excaliburs is they have a really good hardwood mount on all the areas. So this will be plenty strong. I mean, this looks really industrial, and that's not going anywhere. So we did that on both of the main landing gear. Now the front, we're doing this a little bit different, and the reason we're doing it different is the gear mounts are a little bit more narrow on the front, and when we screw in through the carbon plate and the gear with those wood screws, they are going straight into the gear mount. The gear mounts are nice and wide and tight right against the gear. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use these wood screws. These are actually leftovers from the L39 build. And then I'm going to put probably one more either in the center or one more front and back. But either way, it's a little bit different, but that's the reason why we're mounting the front different than the back. Now, as far as clearance goes, we got a decent amount of clearance around the wheel itself. So we have about 1 centimeter on the back and even on both sides. And then our steering mechanism at the front here, because we sanded this whole area out, has plenty of room to operate. The other benefit of doing the front gear mounting this way is if we had those nuts and bolts sticking up, or even the nut head sticking up, it might interfere with our cable coming off of the steering mechanism. So this is going to work great, I think, and really happy with how that turned out. So now what I need to do is I need to pull these gear back out, and we need to figure out the wiring, and also need to put some CA in the mounting holes as well. All right, guys, one of the really cool things with the Electron controller, the GS200, is you can set it up for single channel operation. So it's pretty straightforward. So basically you just need to set your gear channel to run with your gear switch, and then have an overdrive with your brake. So if you watch my gear channel here, so right now my gear is down, and I can overdrive it with my right slider. Okay, you can see right there. So that only uses one channel, and everything gear-wise still works perfect. So the way I have my mix set up is when the gear is up and I use my slider, nothing works on that channel. And then when my gear is down, then my brakes are active. All right, guys, so I just spent a bit of time figuring out the brake line setup here, and I think the best way to do it is to go underneath the landing gear and through the existing hole that was there, and I think that should work out good. Before I fastened it onto the leg itself, I was moving this in and out, and I think that'll work just perfect. So we've got that all set up on the one side, and I've got the brake line coming through here. And then the actual gear motor, I'm just going to probably create another hole right down here, and then we're going to put a little bit of that snakeskin material on here just where it passes through the actual fiberglass, and get that set up. So as per usual, what I like to do is figure out one side. Once this is good and I'm happy with everything, then I'll move to the other side. And just to give you a shot here of what I had to do, that's the cutouts or grindouts that I had needed to do on the gear mounting in order for that to fit. All right, guys, we've got the gear mounted back on the left-hand side. We've got some CA inserted in the screw holes, the screws back in, and everything looks like it should work great. So gear up. There we go. And then gear down. Perfect. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to retract the gear, and I want to put some Loctite on the angle adjust screw so we can get that set and finalized. Now I'm going to take that screw out, put some Loctite on it, and I know right now I need to come forward just a little bit, but we basically want to get it centered in the wheel well. All right, guys, nose gear installation is done. I just ran the cable that actuates the nose gear back this way and through the hole that was previously there for the airlines. So we've got the steering cables all connected. Now this isn't connected to the servo right now, so I've just got to be careful when extending this. But I'm just going to try and extend this gear and see what it looks like. There we go. So one cool thing with this new design, and I'm just saying new design because I've only played with some older ones, and the one for my Ultra Flash is different because it's got the servo mounted on there. But the nice thing about this is the way this trunnion and clamp system is designed. As soon as this gear starts to retract, the block here actually goes in between the gear itself. So it's going to keep everything nice and centered, which is super cool. So, I mean, obviously your servo needs to be centered as well, but that's just a really slick design, and I really like that. So front gear is good, and I think we're pretty much ready to flip this thing over. Now, just a side note for you guys, of course, like normal, make sure you Loctite everything. I've gone over all the bolts joining the leg to the actual gear itself. So all the Allen key bolts have Loctite on them. And we've got our pin joining the two pieces together. So that's all done. What I did was take a carbon rod, put it on the outside of the wheel here, and we've got just a little bit of toe in, so we're sitting with the carbon rod level at the back end, and we're in about here on the front end. So I don't know how many degrees that is, but we've got a little bit of toe in set up, and that is good. All right, guys, she is on her own legs for the first time on these new gear and struts and wheels. So it looks good. So now that it's on its wheels, we can do some rearranging. But one of the things we want to do with this plane is clean all of this mess up. Got a lot of stuff going on there, and we're going to want to make sure that we readjust everything and basically reorganize everything and make it a little bit cleaner with all the new install. Next thing I'm going to do is pull the turbine out. We've got a very bent aluminum arm on the flap servo, and we want to change that out because it's like folded right over. So we've got to get the turbine out to get access to that servo horn. Now we can pull this servo horn off. And there we go. So now what I can do is I can find a suitable replacement, and I know roughly where it needs to go back on, and we can get everything hooked up. So what happened here is it basically bent the metal servo horn. I think this is a Seacraft servo horn. Anyways, I mean, it's not a very strong servo horn to begin with, and it also snapped the rod holding this together. Now, the rod's beneficial because I know how long I need to make the replacement, but I need to find a suitable replacement for the servo horn too. All right, guys, the flap servo is all fixed. We put a Dubro nylon horn on there and switched it to a Sullivan Golden clevis. The reason I switched to a clevis instead of the ball joint is on those nylon horns, the side load on the ball joints doesn't do well with the plastic or nylon horns. So that's why I switched it to what it is. And here's the flap working. So flaps off. Half flaps, full flaps. All right, guys, so just taking care of the cracks on the fuselage here. So I think when this airplane had the rough landing, this is where it bent. So just need to do a little bit of reinforcing here. I've already put a little bit of thin CA there and some kicker just to hold the outside portion where it originally was. And then now what I'm going to do is I've cut a couple pieces of carbon fiber. This is some heavy carbon fiber cloth. I'm just going to mix up some 5-minute epoxy and paint this on the plastic, soak this up, and then put these on the fuselage. And then if you want to or need to, you can just take your brush and smooth it out. I generally find on a small patch like this, it isn't really necessary. And when this cures, just remember if you have any overhanging in this spot here, you can just cut that off with a razor blade. It's nice and simple. So that'll reinforce that area very, very well. And we just need to let that cure. All right, guys, the carbon, it's the next day. The carbon that I put on there is cured. The epoxy's cured, I should say, not the carbon. We're going to let it cure a little bit longer. It's still somewhat flexible, but that worked out good. So we'll cut that off eventually. So what I'm working on now is just kind of reorganizing everything. So we've got the fuel tank kind of back in. I might need to take it back out, but just kind of reorganizing all the wiring, just installing the Electron brake controller. I think when I organize this, I'm going to put things back the way they were before. So the receiver is going to go right here. The gyro is going to go right there. And then we've got the holes and everything that we can try and run all the cabling through. But that's kind of our starting position for getting things organized. All right, guys, we got things a little bit more organized in there. Don't look down underneath that tray, but some of the stuff is just glued in, like these little cable holders. So I'm just waiting for those things to cure. Now the gyro used to be positioned over here. We positioned it this way and turned it 90 degrees just so it would be a little bit better situated, and the cables and stuff are all a little bit more organized. So these two cables over here, they're just coming over to the data relay module for the turbine, and this other one's for the GPS. So much more organized in there. So just waiting for that stuff to cure before we do any more work in there. So this stuff's pretty close to being done. One thing I like to do is make a list, especially on a plane like this where we're getting the work done, and then we won't be flying this plane probably for a few more months because we're in winter. So just make a list on it of things that need to happen before the maiden happens, and that's it. So I thought I'd just throw a little update in there for you of what things are looking like and making good progress. All right, guys, we are pretty much wrapped up on the reorganization of the Excalibur XL. So the only thing we have left to do is to figure out the power for the landing gear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tee off the turbine battery. So all I need to do for that is to create just an adapter where we can plug the turbine in, the power for the gear in, and that goes into the battery. So that's the last thing that I need to do on this plane, and it is ready to go. All right, guys, everything on the inside of the airplane is organized and done. Made up a custom wiring harness here, so now we've got the plug-in for the turbine power here. We've got the other end of the plug here, the battery connections here. So that is basically a little extension that I made up. And then halfway on the extension, I made another extension going over to the landing gear power input. So now the landing gear is run off of a 3-cell Life battery. So it's going to have more power than when I was using it before, which is totally acceptable on this gear. And that is run off of the turbine battery. And then we've got our 2 receiver batteries. And just like before, we do have switches on this plane. We've got 2 switches. We've got 2 batteries, both plugged into the receiver. So we do have a bit of redundancy there. And then there's one of the switches which has 2 outputs, and that's what the smoke pump is run off of. So it's that particular system's been working really well for a long time now. So we're just going to keep that way, and should be good. So now basically at the end of the day and between flights, but mainly at the end of the day, obviously power is off, and then we just unplug this single battery connection right here, which takes the power away from the gear and the turbine. So that is basically the reorganization of this plane. We've got everything installed. I'm just going to trim these little bits of carbon off here. All right, guys, so just as a final couple adjustments here that I need to do, I'm just going to adjust the gear. Now you can see from your camera angle how much toe in we have, which is a lot. Actually, if we go over the wing, over the body a little bit more, there's far too much toe in. So I'm going to adjust these and get them a little bit better. I'm just going to show get kind of what we're looking for here. So, I mean, that would be level with the body. We want to be roughly around that much. So we want to be a couple degrees of toe in, not 10 degrees by any means. So that's how we do it. Just use a small piece of, I like to use carbon because it's straight. You also want to make sure your carbon dowel is straight. This is a square piece of carbon. So anyways, that's how I'm going to do it. Just add a couple degrees of toe in on both legs, and we are ready for some final checks. And we'll turn this guy on. There we go. So gears down. You can see it there. Okay, so final little checks. The flap is making a ton of noise. Now we're not all the way up, but the flap is struggling to pull the surface up. So I'm just going to go in, adjust that so our buzz is gone. I mean, when the plane's just sitting around anyways, I always leave my flap at takeoff or mid-flap just so it's not fighting. It might still fight. Yeah, that's better. So that's good. So flaps are good. We're going to give the gear a try. Now, one of the important things I'm checking here is with the front landing gear, we want to make sure that the pin engages nicely, and that all works good. I haven't tightened the strut up yet because I want to get my final adjustment, but that's one of the things I want to check, so we'll check that next. I'm just checking that the pin for the gear actually goes in to that little carrier, which is the steering system. So we'll drop the gear down. Beautiful. It works awesome. So everything works good there. The rear gear looks good. Beautiful. So next thing I'll check is just making sure that our gyro is going to work. So when I move the plane this way, the nose or the wheel should turn that way, which is good. That's what it's doing. To give you a different perspective here, if you watch the servo, you can see the servo moving or responding. So that's good. Last thing I want to check with the nose gear is to make sure that it's nice and straight when I'm staring straight down the plane, which it is. That's awesome. So then what I'll do now that I know that that's good is I just tighten these guys up with some Loctite. So I'll do that. Okay, so those have been all Loctited, so we're good to go there. Now because we are, man, that gear is nice, eh? Super stable, not a lot of play in there, that's great. Okay, so because we're going to be storing this plane, I'm just going to pop the gear up for the last time. I'll show you guys a little bit farther away view here. Awesome. Electron, you make nice gear. If any executives are watching from Electron, although I'm not sponsored, I love your gear. It's amazing stuff. Thumbs up. Well done. We do have to adjust the brakes when we do the maiden, so I'll just write on my piece of green tape. Okay, so that is all good. What else do we need to check? We need to adjust the gyro later on. We've got our GPS unit, which is flashing green, so that's got power. That's all good. All right, guys. Well, we are all done with the crash repair plus the upgrade on the Excalibur XL. I know the owner of this plane is going to love this plane now. We have a couple great upgrades on this plane. First of all, it's all reorganized. We've got the new King Tech 160 G4 turbine, which is going to be way quicker throttle response, and it's going to make this plane great to fly. We probably also lost some weight in the back end, so we're going to have to CG this thing as well. We got the new Electron retracts installed, along with new legs, new wheels, all that stuff, electric brakes. We've got the fancy Electron controller in the plane, which is going to add the nose wheel gyro. So this plane's going to be a totally different plane next time we fly it. Really looking forward to flying this plane, remaining this plane, and it should be a blast for the upcoming 2021 flying season. All right, guys, so that is everything for this episode. Hopefully, this episode gave you a little bit of insight, maybe some pointers and tips on how to repair a crashed aircraft, installing some gear, upgrading, things like that. It's all very, very straightforward stuff, simple upgrades, good upgrades that are going to make this plane fly better. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. If you have any questions, make sure you list them down below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already and you're coming across my videos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below so you guys don't miss out on any new content that I release. Try to release 2 videos per week, and they're about builds, flying, all that kind of stuff. If this is the winter time, I'm generally releasing videos about builds more than flying. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. Have a great day, great evening, wherever, whenever you're watching this, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you.